Thank you for joining us for the Secure Connections podcast, brought to you by IoTSSA, the Internet of Things Security Services Association. I'm your host, as always, Brian Sherman, Content Director for IoTSSA, and joining me for today's episode is Brad Maryman from Maryman Associates Incorporated, a Southern California-based firm that specializes in digital forensics. The company has computer forensic examiners across the United States who frequently travel to other locations, including globally, to support their clients' needs. Looking forward to a great conversation today. Brad, welcome to the Secure Connections podcast.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, we're looking forward to it. As I said, as a first-time guest, I'd love to learn a little more about you and your cybersecurity experience. And I understand you have a long history in criminal investigation, so we'll start there. How did you get into detective work?
Pretty straightforward. As a youth, I was interested in law enforcement, and I spoke to a number of family friends and associates, some of whom had either were still in or had previously been in law enforcement. And fairly universally, I was pointed toward the FBI, which I wound up joining after college. So it started there, and I got into a variety of investigative fields and loved every minute of it.
Very good. Did you get to do a fair amount of traveling in that position?
You know, not as much as they do today. The FBI today is certainly much more of a global reach. There were a couple of international travels during my career. Folks today do quite a bit more than that. I did travel throughout the country, though, quite a bit. I think I have hit now every single state in the U.S., so it's been a good ride.
Gotcha. I think you're a few ahead of me. There's a couple gaps out there that I haven't hit yet, but we'll see what 2019 brings. So, so you spent a number of years with the FBI, and then what other types of investigative work have you done over your career?
I was lucky to have a fairly broad set of items to be investigated, everything from organized crime. I did La Cosa Nostra Mafia type things, white collar crime, fraud by wire type investigations, to include violent crime, everything from bank robberies to theft of interstate shipments and stolen property across state lines. As the years unfolded, computer crime started coming into the fore. And I embraced that. That was, I'd always loved computers, worked on my father's mainframe in a bank that he was an executive with, doing old punch cards. So I started out pretty early in this game, at probably about 10 years old.
It's interesting how fraud and crime have evolved with the computer. Even the Catch Me If You Can. I'm trying to remember the gentleman who was involved in that. I know he came to work with the FBI and do a fair amount of work with the fraud unit, online fraud unit, over the years with technology.
He certainly did, yes.
So it's been interesting to see that transition. So let's turn our focus to that front, to the cybercrime, and talk a little about what Maryman Associates does. How did your business come about?
Well, what I wanted to do is I wanted to build on the things that I had learned and helped establish while in the FBI. So I wanted to continue working in the forensic and cyber world. It was almost a foregone conclusion that whenever I left, that would be the next step. It was what interested me, and I was, wouldn't say prescient about it, but I suspected that the cyber world and cybercrime were going to be the next big thing because it was going to affect everything. And I'm afraid that's certainly been the case. Even the FBI, and when it first started talking about cybercrime and this type of thing, computer crime, they had squads that dealt with just computers and those crimes. That's changed today. There are some specialized squads, but they've come to understand that cyber issues and crime run the gamut of all the investigative facets, whether it be white collar crime, organized crime, or anything else. intelligence gathering the entire scope of everything that they handle. There has been some cyber aspect to it, and so I wanted to be part of that as it grew.
As it grew, it sounds like it's gotten more complicated too over the years, because obviously with online, it's not necessarily in the Los Angeles area like you're at. It's an international issue. How is that? How are you tackling that in your business?
A couple of aspects. You're absolutely right. There is an international. It's a global aspect to the crimes that are occurring today. You don't have to be in the same neighborhood with someone to create a crime anymore. Anybody that's still robbing banks or doing stick-ups at local grocery stores or Stop and Shop is not only far behind the time, they're extremely foolish. The odds of them being caught are extremely high, and the odds of them getting very much money are extremely low. Quite the contrary to cyber crimes. You can be anywhere in the world. You can be in Bangladesh. You could be in Australia. You could be in France. It doesn't make any difference. I could be next door. Sometimes we've seen that be almost a level of obfuscation that they actually attack someone nearby, but they were able to post their IP addresses outside the U.S. to look like it was coming from somewhere else.
Yeah, it's probably a lot safer to be a cyber criminal too than walking in a bank with a gun or a pretend gun. He's too. It
really is. This is definitely a cost-benefit analysis type thing. If you're doing cybercrime, you've obtained the highest reward and the lowest responsibility for your actions.
It makes perfect sense. So what services do you currently provide, and tell us a little about the people that you serve?
We typically have our core offerings are in digital forensics, cyber investigations, and breach response. The digital forensics actually is the underlying aspect to both cyber investigations and breach response. You're still having to do the examination and determine what's happening. The forensics of this aspect for what we're providing now is throughout managed service providers, IT service firms. We have contracts with both government agencies as well as some fairly large corporate clients. But the core of our business is probably in the SMB market. That's who we really want to try to provide services to. They usually don't have the in-house capabilities or the funds to establish their own setup for forensics and staff. So we try to step into the breach at that point and say, okay, we will provide this as a service to those clients. So we feel like those are usually our core client.
Very good. And I'll circle back to that partnering thing in a few minutes here. But when you and I last spoke, you mentioned there's 3 things involved in the forensics process. Can you please share those objectives with the audience?
In the smallest and lay terms, it's what occurred, how it occurred, and who was responsible. When I speak to clients and to insurance companies and agencies, it's more verify the event. That sounds overly simple, except for the fact that many times what is initially thought to be occurring in a network or system is actually an initial misdirection. They've shown something to make it look like one thing is going on when actually they're in the background doing something entirely different. So verifying the event and what is actually occurring, the effects it's having on the network, whether it is to destroy information, steal information, alter it. Those are the types of things that are during that portion of the investigation. Determine the causation and methods employed. This is where we're looking to see, okay, how did they get in? What things did they touch? Was there any exfiltration of data? Have they taken advantage of the financial systems that are in the network and obtained account numbers, account access credentials, things like this. Things that they can leverage either through that network or independently from another network at a later time. Then lastly, it's attempt to provide attribution to the origins. Today, that's an extremely difficult thing. Again, you can be in China and you can pretend to be in Canada. So if they're attacking someone here in the U.S., it is going to take some real sleuthing and sometimes help of the government to try and actually get to the actual culprits involved. There are some things for attribution that involve the methodologies, the particular tools, basically the protocols and policies that are being used in the exploitation or the attack on the network. Some of those things are telltale signs of particular groups, especially Russian and Chinese groups, because they're so militarized that they have a particular way of doing things and a set of tools that each of them has to themselves. Some they've created themselves, others are just typical tools that are available, unfortunately, on the internet. So the attribution, it's attempted. Sometimes we hit it right on the nail. Other times we can say it appears to be something like this or that, or this particular group may be involved. But again, with the manner in which people can hide these days to provide a false front, a false set of IP addresses, this type of thing, it's becoming more difficult by the day.
So it sounds like the complexity is growing, but they're also playing off the tendencies of IT professionals, whether it be an MSP or an in-house IT staff, to try to cloak, I guess would be a term, cloak what may be happening behind the scenes, so that they're focusing one way, but they're actually stealing data or doing something on the back end that is a little harder to detect. That's kind of the process you're talking about.
It certainly is. Got
it. So how big a role does forensic play in cybersecurity today? I know it's a little bit of a tricky question, but it sounds like you're getting busier and busier these days based on the complexity of the attacks.
It is, but it's also, our perspective is that forensics is crucial in establishing the patterns and trends in order for firms and agencies to defend against. If we can, during the examinations, come up with the causation and the methods employed, how are they going about the attack, and what types of things are they doing once they're in? Once you know those things, it becomes easier to just establish what you're going to defend against and what types of information you're going to try to defend more strongly than other pieces of information. So if you have PHI or PII type information, you have trade secrets, plans, drawings, engineering items that are core to your business, then you're going to protect them more strongly than you're going to protect, let's say, a client sales list, although those are also very important as well. So forensics is trying to not only make determinations for the investigative side of it. Hopefully what we learn can be leveraged by the cybersecurity firms to say, okay, here are the things that are happening. This is how we're going to have to address them.
Almost sounds like a mock trial of sorts, too, where you're going through different scenarios of what's happened in the past and what's the best approach to take in the future.
It really is. I mean, at least in this manner, you're getting to see what, from a live standpoint, there's no trickery about it. There's no sense of, well, we expect it to be this or we think it might be this. You have real live information that is critical in making decisions about how to defend. So you're seeing what's actually being used in the wild, if you will. to make attacks and to successfully gain access into networks.
So Brad, what are some of the biggest challenges your team's faced?
When it comes to breaches and examinations, it really comes down to, do we have the information necessary to even make determinations about what has occurred? It is unfortunately a very frequent occurrence that will go into a small firm, and there is a lack of logs or granularity of logs that are necessary to provide the sufficient data points for examination. We've actually had to walk away from some clients purely because of the fact that there was nothing we could do to assist them. There was no data for us to look at to help identify what had happened or how it happened or even when it happened. So we not only did not get to tell them that just because you were breached doesn't mean that that breach was leveraged into a loss of information or some other activity that may be malevolent to that company. But we also can't say exactly what did occur. So the fact that we're forced to look at logs that merely said they don't identify the IP addresses, they don't identify segments of the network that may have been traversed. These types of things, they're necessary for us to make a determination. And if those things are not available, then it makes it nearly impossible to actually assist them. So what we're looking at really is actually trying to hopefully work with some of the firms before there's an event to help them understand what they need to have in play. Default logs from some devices are the same. There's a great deal of things that are turned off by default, unfortunately. And going in and setting those things up and helping teams look at what they have available to them and what they can turn on, which will pay great dividends down the line. So hopefully if we can get in and talk with firms before there's an issue, we can make sure that if and when that issue does arise, that they are available, the information is available to look at and determine what has occurred.
Now, when you assume a cybercrime has taken place or there's been a cybersecurity breach and your team comes in, can you kind of walk through how do you project this? Do you do like a storyboard of here's the evidence and build it like the old chalkboard case, looking at the crime stories, or do you have like applications that you work through to try to compile all this information together?
It's a little bit of both, Brian. The detective work, the investigative side of things, is something that's been established for hundreds, if not 1,000 years. So you don't want to ignore those types of things. There are applications that we do use that will look at certain aspects of a network or a series of systems that can give us some underlying information. And perhaps if we're lucky, they will give us leads to where to look next. Sometimes it's the people really, the forensic examiners, the response persons who are familiar with these types of things and say, okay, I'm not seeing this from the information, but I also know that in order for them to get to certain areas, they've got to go through other locations within the network. And so if I don't see it here, then I'll look for it somewhere else. So there's multiple ways to skin the cat, if you will, and we'll try to use all of them to get to the bottom of what's occurred and try to assist the client as best possible.
Makes perfect sense. An investigation, no matter if it's cybersecurity or just pure criminal, I would assume. But in what situations, Brad, do MSPs typically come to your team looking for support? Is there any particular types of cyber crimes or types of businesses? Can you give us a little background on what's a good partnering opportunity for MSPs to come to you?
Almost across the board, we see everything from small accounting firms to fairly small medical clinics up into the mid-range of both those as well. But we've seen a local, or actually a regional plumbing company that was attacked. You wouldn't think that that's going to be a high-value target, but then you think about it, they have clients, they have information about those clients, they have their own employees, they have information about those employees, they have financial accounts. All those things make them targets, even though it doesn't look like it's the typical movie sexy target that, okay, well, they get here, they get the mother lode. Sometimes they don't need the mother lode. Sometimes the mother lode to an attacker is gaining information for identity theft, for leveraging access to financial accounts, the sale of information about for health insurance, information is really big at this point, especially on the dark web. So regardless of the industry that you're in, you are a target. There's absolutely no question. If you have a computer, you have information, then you're a target. That being said, we do see that some of the more sophisticated attacks are being waged against healthcare and financial institutions, from major banks to local and regional banking and financial institutions, tax firms, accounting firms, even to brokerages, this type of thing. So they're all seem to be put in a bucket of, okay, we're going to have a little greater access if we get into these particular networks, because they're going to have the very types of information that are so important to us as the malicious targets, to be able to leverage those into financial gain.
So the value of the data obviously makes it a larger target, I would assume.
It certainly does. Well, when you have, again, the plumbing company has that type of information, but it has a smaller subset of that information. If you get into, to make matters worse, I mean, healthcare and financial institutions are big targets. Probably the biggest targets of all, the real mother lode, are the credit companies. You're talking about Experian and TransUnion, this type of thing.
Yeah.
Those are the mother lode. They have the information that everybody wants, which is why they have, the level of security in these institutions is enormous. Yet even with that, the amount of money and time and effort that's gone into securing them, they themselves still fall prey to these things as well.
Now, you mentioned financial and healthcare, and I think FINRA and HIPAA. How
Yes.
big a factor is regulatory and industry compliance in your business?
For us, a couple of things. One, there are sets of information that those regulatory agencies and insurance companies, to be quite frank, want to know about the event. Not only how did it happen, how can you defend better against it the next time, but who is affected. Will there have to be notifications to affected parties? Does this the event constitute a violation by that party in their defense of that information? So getting in there and learning everything we can about what has occurred, and it's showing that the clients were doing their due diligence, yet it still fell prey. So from our standpoint, we look for everything we can about what's occurred, but there are sometimes specific instances where regulations want to know, okay, how many people were affected, what types of information was actually exfiltrated, or was any information actually exfiltrated? Did any PII or PHI or other information actually go outbound from the network? I can't tell you the number of times that we've had very lucky clients who have been breached, that their systems were no longer in their control, but we got there soon enough. It was recognized quickly, and before the bad actors could actually take advantage of that and leverage that access, it was stopped. They were tossed out of the network and nothing was actually exfiltrated. So they didn't gain any advantage. They broke in. It's kind of like the burglar who breaks into the house, the alarm goes off and he runs away. Yes, he got in, but was it anything affected? Did he grab any jewelry, any silver or anything else to take with him? No, he didn't. And that occurs on a fairly regular basis with the incursions in the networks. So the cybercrime issue is not just did they get in, but what did they do once they got in as well.
And by having a quick response, are you able to, or I should say, does it help to minimize the regulatory ramifications for a business who is hacked if they're addressing it quickly and responding and providing the right information back?
It really does. It shows that there's been good faith, that they're doing due diligence and protecting as best they can. Everybody knows that there's no perfect protection, and anything that was 5 seconds ago is not now. But it's how they respond to it. Do they have policies and protocols and devices in place that will help them notice or observe that something is amiss, that something's going on and needs further investigation to determine what's happening? If they're doing those things, both from a standpoint of having intrusion protection, identification, this type of thing in their network, but also responding to it. When the flag goes up or the bells go off in the system, did anybody actually do anything? Did they follow the policies and protocols that were established ahead of time? Did they respond quickly enough that they could actually identify and brace the network against any further attacks? Because that seems to be de rigueur for the day, is it's advanced persistent threats, where yes, I got in through this door, but now to make sure that even if they close this one, that I'm still in there, I'm going to establish 2, 12, 15, or 100 other back doors through other avenues that allow me to maintain my presence here. So if their due diligence allows them to establish where the initial occurrence was and the other thing that they're touching, then you can provide information to the team to say, okay, we now need to harden our defenses in these particular areas and kick them out of the network, block certain IP ranges or particular IP addresses, any types of executables that need a certain type or have an effect. You can block those as well. So there's a number of things that companies and service providers can do that are preemptive. Establish the ability to understand when something has actually occurred, and then actually follow up on it. I can't tell you the times that we have seen in the logs that there were intrusion, there were IPS devices that had sounded alarms 6, 10, and 12 months prior to our being called in to look at things. They had the notice, they just didn't look at them. They didn't follow them down. Sometimes it's because it's overwork. They get so many flags go off that they can't get to all of them. So the MSPs can do a great service by helping to sift through all that and make sure that the things that need to get looked into are actually being addressed.
Makes sense. And I know a lot of the discussions we have at our live events for IoTSSA, we hear MSPs. I know it's a cost benefit. It's hard when you're looking at putting a value on risk. Is the risk of getting compromised? There could be future lawsuits? There could be regulatory fines. Those are all in the future. They're not something current. So when you're proposing security systems and cybersecurity precautions, it can be a little difficult with some in the SMB. So if not for the regulatory and industry compliance rules, do you think SMBs would worry about who committed a breach and what information may have been compromised?
If they're forward-looking enough, I would certainly think so. It's like any other insurance. I mean, does anybody think that, okay, I'm going to buy a house and I'm not going to have fire insurance? It's become ingrained into us that we're going to have that type of insurance. I think that for the same standpoint, when you're any company that is using computers to help maintain and manage and run their business, that cyber insurance and cyber security precautions have to take place. It's not just foolish. I mean, it is, from a business standpoint, it's really bad business if you don't pursue that.
Right. It's amazing what people do, though. It's one of the struggles we have with cost versus benefit, and we think it would make sense. So let's briefly talk about the notification process. Who do you typically share the details of your investigation with, and what are some of the common timelines for reporting breaches and issues that you run into?
Well, I can, as a provider of services for forensics and response, that our client is literally the affected firm and their legal counsel. And depending upon the service agreements between the MSPs and their clients, sometimes we can't even tell the MSPs what's going on. And it's awful. I find that very distasteful, because I can't talk to some of the people who know some of the most about what I'm trying to find. So if MSPs can make arrangements in their agreements with their individual clients that they are part and parcel to the response and need to be involved, and that we can ask questions and share information with them, it makes a big difference in the outcome of these things. Some of the legal counsel for the end clients want to be notified first, which I certainly get. That's some things they want to be able to control with the information flow. So for us, our flow of information is directly to legal counsel, actually prior to the client itself, because that attorney has got to be able to make some decisions and know how best to advise their individual clients based on the information we provide. So by our own agreements with clients and MSPs and the law firms, we make no notifications to agencies or to states, to government regulatory branches. That is through the law firms themselves. They're the ones that are actually making those response notifications to those individuals.
Very interesting. Yeah, I'd love to dive into that, hopefully in a future podcast. But that is awesome. Unfortunately, I would love to talk to you for another hour or so, Brad, but we're kind of running low on time. Do you have any final thoughts or advice you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Well, probably being the preparedness, like everything else. I mean, be Boy Scout, Girl Scout. Take a look at your business. Learn what you need to have to run it efficiently. That's something that everybody understands already. But looking forward a little bit, and it's really not a matter of if, but when a company is going to be attacked. It's growing exponentially every year. So the number of affected persons and businesses it's going to be astounding this year and in the future years. So it really is a matter of when, not if. So if you can take that into heart, try to be more prepared for that eventuality. Turn on the logging, do a mock expo of what you want to do should this occur. Who do you call first? What information do I gather? What people of my own staff need to be advised? How do I set together a team to respond to these types of things? Do I need to not only look out for what law firm do I find? What forensics firm do I contact? But it's also who do I talk to about public relations? Things like this. remediation? Are there failover sites? Are there companies that provide services that I can take my information and move them to them should I have a failure of my systems? Well, I find that one I don't think people think about those too often, but we've actually had an industrial client where the malware that was found in their system was actually destroying the drivers and the information for the physical devices that were in the plant. And it basically shut them down. So finding another location to be able to continue with their efforts to supply their clients was very much a part of their plans and was something that actually worked when it did occur. So being prepared to establish those defensive strategies, it really is the key.
Excellent advice, Brad. One last thing, too. How can our audience get a hold of you if they have questions or would like to talk about partnership opportunities?
Would certainly love to hear from any of those. Our website is www.maryman.com. On the site, you can contact us through the website. There's also telephone numbers there. You can also reach me at help@maryman.com. So anyway, there's a telephone number as well on the website. We'd be happy to talk to them in any manner they wish to.
Awesome. On behalf of IoTSSA, I'd like to extend a big thank you to Brad Maryman from Maryman Associates Incorporated for joining us today. I encourage our listeners to check out all the great channel-exclusive cybersecurity content on the association's website. That's IoTSSA.com. I'd like to say have a safe and secure day, and be sure to stay tuned for our next Secure Connections podcast. Thank you.